The fluorescent light in the break room had been flickering for 11 days. Lena had counted. She counted everything. Occupational hazard, her old boss used to say, before he handed her a box and told her the firm was restructuring. That was the word they used when they meant you specifically. She was on her third cup of coffee and her second hour of pretending to review the catering invoices for the Harmon Wexley wedding when her phone buzzed. "Don't come home tonight." She read it twice. Then a third time, the way you do when the words make sense individually but refuse to assemble into meaning. It was from Devin. Devin, who had been her fiancé for 14 months. Devin, who still had her grandmother's ring on a sticky note reminder in his phone so he wouldn't forget her size. Devin, who's supposed to be in Cincinnati for a sales conference until Friday. She typed back, "What?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. I'm with someone. We've been seeing each other since March. I didn't know how to. Lena, I'm sorry, I really am." The coffee cup was still warm in her hand. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered. Somewhere down the hall, her co-worker Patrice was laughing at something, that big honking laugh she had that you could hear through 2 closed doors. Lena set the cup down very carefully, the way you do when you're afraid your hands might not be trustworthy. "Who?" she typed. The dots again. Longer this time. Your sister. She didn't cry. She thought she would. She'd seen herself cry before. At sentimental commercials. At the end of Steel Magnolias. At the time she found a baby bird on the sidewalk outside her apartment. But sitting in the break room of Gilmore Event Planning with the invoice for 400 petits fours in her hands, she did not cry. She stood up, gathered her jacket and her purse, and walked out. Not home. Obviously not home. The apartment was technically hers, her name on the lease, her deposit, but she couldn't go back there and look at his things arranged among her things and feel what she would feel. Not yet. She drove. Just drove. The kind of aimless looping you do through a city you've lived in for 6 years, but still haven't entirely figured out, taking turns without deciding to take them. She ended up on the east side, down near the warehouse district, which she never came to, which was probably why she ended up there. The bar was called Kessler's. She almost didn't go in. The sign was old, the kind of neon that had lost a letter at some point and nobody had replaced it, so it just said KSLR's in a burnt orange glow. But there was a parking spot directly in front, and the universe seemed to be directing her, and she was 29 years old, and had just learned that her fiancé and her sister had been sleeping together since March. So she went in. It was quieter than she expected. Dark in the good way, not the sad way. Long mahogany bar, backlit bottles, the kind of place that had been there for 40 years and intended to be there for 40 more. She took a stool at the far end, away from the cluster of men in work jackets watching baseball, and ordered a whiskey because it seemed like the appropriate drink for the kind of night this was, even though she didn't particularly like whiskey. She drank it too fast and ordered another. The man who sat down next to her did not ask permission. He simply arrived, the way large, certain things arrive. Gravity, bad news, thunderstorms. He was in a dark suit that had not come off any rack she'd ever seen. Late 30s, maybe 40, with the kind of face that had been handsome once, and was now something more severe than handsome. The angles sharper, a scar along his jaw that was old and well settled. He did not look at her. He looked at the bar, and then at the bartender, who appeared with a glass of something amber without being asked. She noticed his hands. The knuckles were scarred, too. A lot of them. She went back to her whiskey. "You're drinking like someone who doesn't like whiskey," he said. He still wasn't looking at her. "I like it fine. You wince every time." She didn't answer that. He wasn't wrong. "Bad night," he said. "Terrific night." "Great. Really going my way." She turned the glass in her hands. "My fiancé and my sister have been together since March. I just found out. Via text, while I was at work, while I was looking at an invoice for petits fours. Do you know how much a custom petit four costs? Because I do. I know exactly how much, and I spent 2 hours today arguing with a baker about fondant consistency for a wedding that is now." She stopped, set the glass down. Not happening. A silence settled. He said nothing, which she appreciated. People always said something useless. "Oh no," or "what a jerk," or "you'll find someone better," as if the platitude could metabolize the particular ugliness of it. Her sister, Devon, since March. "Fondant," he said finally. "It cracks, under certain conditions," which I explained to the baker, but She stopped again. "Why am I talking to you about fondant? I don't know, but you seem to know a lot about it." "I plan events for a living, weddings mostly." "Which is," she laughed, and it came out slightly wrong. "Great career choice, given the circumstances." He finally looked at her. His eyes were a dark grey, the kind of grey that isn't soft, that has weight to it. He had the expression of someone who had heard a great many things and been surprised by very few of them. "Cade," he said. Like it was a first name or a last name, she couldn't tell, just one word offered and nothing more. "Lena." He didn't extend his hand. She didn't either. They drank in silence for a while, which should have been uncomfortable and wasn't. She wasn't sure, later, how the conversation moved from silence to actual conversation, or how the second glass became a third, or how she ended up telling a stranger about the way her sister Bethany had always done this, had always reached over and taken, casually, like borrowing a sweater, and then kept it. But at some point she was talking and he was listening, and it was the most listened to she'd felt in a long time, which told her something she'd probably known for months. "You're not surprised," she said. "About your sister. About any of it. The way I'm sitting here." She gestured vaguely at herself, at the bar, at the wreckage of a Tuesday evening. "Most people would be crying. Most people, aren't you?" She looked at him sideways. "You don't know me." "No." He turned his glass once. "But I know the kind of person who calculates fondant failure rates under stress. You didn't come here to fall apart. You came here to think." It was so accurate, she didn't know what to do with it. The bar began to empty. She hadn't noticed the hours moving, but they had. The baseball men drifted out. Patrons settled their tabs. Even the bartender, the same one who had appeared for Cade without being asked, was moving around the far end of the bar with a dish rag in a way that suggested closing time was approaching. She reached for her purse and knocked it off the stool entirely. Everything skidded across the floor. Her wallet, her keys, a pen, a chapstick, receipts she kept meaning to file. God, sorry. She slid off the stool to gather it. He crouched down at the same time, and they were briefly at the same level, close, and she could see the scar on his jaw clearly, and another one, smaller, at his temple, half hidden by his hair. Their hands closed on her wallet at the same moment. "I have it," she said. "I know." He let go. She stuffed everything back into her purse. Her hands were not as steady as she would have liked. The bartender appeared and placed a folded card in front of Cade. She assumed it was the bill. Cade looked at it, then at her. "I need a favor," he said. She stood up. "You don't know me well enough to need a favor. Hear it first." She should have left. She knew that, in the abstract, theoretical way you know not to eat the entire sleeve of cookies, correct information that arrives and then is ignored anyway. "What favor?" she said. He set the card on the bar, facing her. It was not a bill. It was a business card, heavy stock, with a single address and a name embossed in black. Cade Morrow, Morrow & Associates. "I have a tax situation," he said. She blinked. "I'm an event planner. You have a degree in accounting. You had it when you took the event planning job, which, by the way, pays 40% less than you should be making." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" It wasn't a question. It came out flat, the way things do when you're past surprise. "I noticed you 3 weeks ago," he said, without apology. "You did the Alderman Doyle fundraiser at the Briarwood. You caught an error in the bar tab that would have shorted the venue by $800. You did it in your head. I was watching." 3 weeks ago. She'd been at the Briarwood for 5 hours managing a floral emergency and a caterer who'd sent beef instead of chicken for half the plates. She'd barely noticed the guests. She didn't know what that was. "Why does that matter to you?" "Because I need someone who can read a ledger and understand what she's reading. Not someone I have to explain things to. Not someone my existing people can." He paused. Chose a word, influence. She understood what he meant by influence. She understood it in the way you understand the shape of something from its shadow. "What kind of tax situation?" she said slowly. He looked at her, and for a moment she had the distinct sense that he was deciding something. Not whether to lie. She was fairly certain this man did not lie. Not because he was honest, but because lying was inefficient. But how much truth was the right amount? Complicated, he said. I need better than that. Revenue streams that require careful categorization. A pause. Multiple entities, some of which are not conventional. She should have walked out. She knew it. The part of her that had gotten good grades and paid her taxes quarterly and kept a color-coded budget spreadsheet absolutely knew it. She also knew she had no apartment to go back to tonight. Not really. Not one that felt like hers. She knew she had exactly $412 in her checking account after the electric bill cleared on Monday. She knew the event planning job paid 40% less than she should be making, and she'd known that for 18 months, and she'd stayed because it was easier to stay. How complicated, she said. There are 7 subsidiaries, 3 shell companies, technically legitimate but aggressively structured, offshore accounts that require quarterly reconciliation, 2 real estate holding entities that need to be consolidated before the end of the fiscal year, or we pay a penalty that would give my accountant, my former accountant, a heart attack. He said it the way someone reads aloud from a list. Factual. Unashamed. The man who handled this for 15 years retired in January. The firm I hired to replace him spent 4 months and produced nothing I could use. She turned his card over in her fingers. The stock was heavy. Real. You want me to fix it. I want you to look at it. If you can't, you can't. I'll compensate you for your time either way. And if I can, then we'll discuss terms. She looked at the bar, at her empty glass, at the door through which the night waited with its particular version of her problems. I need to see the books first, she said. Before I agree to anything. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, the structural possibility of one. Monday, Face, he said. 9 o'clock. She took the card. She told herself it was just to look. Just numbers. Numbers were honest even when everything else wasn't. The address on the card led to a building in the financial district that had the kind of lobby designed to remind visitors of their relative smallness, marble floors, ceilings that went up 4 stories, security desk with 2 guards who both looked at her with the practiced blankness of people who had been trained to look pleasant while being dangerous. She gave her name. One of them made a call. The other watched her. She looked at the art on the wall. It was abstract, expensive, the kind of thing purchased by a committee trying to seem like a person. The elevator she was put in went up to the 14th floor, and when the doors opened it was not an office. Or it was an office, but the kind that had been built around the idea of something else. Dark wood, low light, a table that could seat 20 people and currently seated none. Windows that took up the entire east wall and showed the city in its grey morning specificity. Cade was at the far end, standing at the window with his back to her, a phone held to his ear. He did not look at her when she entered. He finished the call. You came, he said, turning. I said I would. People say things. He led her to a side room, smaller, more functional, with a table that had actual papers on it, stacked with the particular density of a problem that had been avoided for months. A laptop, 3 external hard drives, a glass of water she hadn't asked for. She sat down, pulled the nearest binder toward her, and opened it. For 40 minutes no one spoke. She read. She made notes in the margins of the legal pad she'd brought, which seemed to amuse him when she'd pulled it from her bag. She used yellow legal pads, had since college, and she was not embarrassed about it. The structure was, well, it was a problem. But it was a solvable problem, the kind that required care rather than genius, the kind she'd been trained for and then spent several years not using. Your former accountant had a system, she said, without looking up. It's just not written down anywhere that I can find, which means he carried it in his head, which means when he left you lost the map. That's accurate. That's bad practice. He'd been with me for 15 years. I didn't anticipate losing him. She looked up. You don't plan for things leaving? The question landed differently than she'd intended. He looked at her for a moment. I'm learning, he said. She went back to the papers. The offshore accounts aren't the problem. They're aggressive, but they're defensible. The real estate consolidation is the problem. Whoever set up the holding structures clearly didn't anticipate the city zoning change in 2021, so now you have two entities technically claiming the same tax classification, which they can't both have. She flipped a page. It's fixable. It'll take time. How much time? 6 weeks if you give me everything I need when I ask for it. 8 if you don't. Silence. You're not going to ask what I'm paying you, he said. I figured you'd tell me. He named a number, monthly, with a performance bonus at the end of the fiscal year if everything cleared. She kept her face neutral, which required effort, because the number was significant in a way that would rearrange her entire situation, the apartment, the credit card balance she'd been quietly managing, all of it. I have conditions, she said. Tell me. I see all the books, everything. I won't do clean work if I'm not seeing the whole picture. That's how you end up with more problems, not fewer. If there's something you don't want me to see, tell me now and I'll go. He watched her. Most people don't make demands of me. I'm not most people. She set down her pen. You noticed that 3 weeks ago. That's why I'm sitting here. A pause that went long enough to have texture to it. All of it, he said. You'll see all of it. Second condition, I work alone, not with your existing people. I've seen how that goes in other contexts. I report to you, only to you, and if anyone in this building gives me trouble, I need to know I can come to you and it'll be handled. Agreed. Third. She picked up the legal pad. Whatever I find in these books that's sloppy, I tell you about it. You don't have to fix it, but I have to be able to tell you. I won't sit on information because it's inconvenient. He tilted his head very slightly. You understand what kind of information you might be sitting on. I understand exactly what kind. She met his gaze. I'm not naive. I'm also not going to do a job badly because I'm scared of the truth in the ledger. I've been doing a job badly for 2 years because of that, and I'm done with it. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out anyway. He said nothing for a moment. 3 weeks, he said finally. Prove the work. After 3 weeks, if everything you've said is accurate, the terms stand and you stay as long as the work needs doing. Fine, you're not going to negotiate the timeline. 3 weeks is fair. I'd have suggested 4. She pulled the next binder toward her. Now, can I get the 2022 filings? The ones in this stack are 2023 and I need to understand how this mess started. She was there for 11 hours that first day. She ate lunch at the table. Someone brought a sandwich. She didn't know who. It appeared the way the glass of water had appeared, materialized by some silent, efficient process she wasn't meant to think about. She ate it without looking up. The sandwich was good, really good. The kind of good that is the result of someone who pays attention. She noticed things over those 11 hours. The building was very quiet in the particular way of places where no one speaks carelessly. When people came in to speak to Cade, they knocked, even when the door was open. They never stayed long. She wasn't introduced, which she hadn't expected to be, but she also wasn't looked at in a way that felt threatening, more like she'd been categorized already. Her presence explained, and they were simply accepting that. Once, mid-afternoon, she found something she shouldn't have, or rather she found an entry that didn't correspond to anything she had documentation for. 6 figures, quarterly, labeled consulting, which meant nothing. She stared at it for a while. Then she wrote it on her legal pad and circled it and put a question mark next to it. She would ask. She'd said she would ask. At 6:15, Cade appeared in the doorway of the side room. He looked at her the way people look at scenes they were not expecting. You're still here. I had a question. She turned the legal pad to face him and pointed at the circled entry. What is this? He came around the table and looked at it. Then he looked at her. Security, he said. Security is a legitimate expense. This isn't logged that way. It's logged as consulting, and there's no corresponding contract. The contracts aren't in those files. Then I need to see the contracts. Tomorrow. She looked at him. Tomorrow. They're not in this building. Something passed through his expression that she couldn't read entirely. Not discomfort exactly. Calculation. It requires a call I haven't made yet. She made a note. Contracts for consulting entries. Off-site. Request 416. All right. Tomorrow. He was still looking at her. "What?" she said. "You circled it. It needed a question mark." "My last accountant," he said slowly, "found that entry in 2019. He left it alone." She set down her pen. "Is that a warning?" He seemed to think about that genuinely. "No," he said. "I think it's the opposite." She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she didn't do anything with it. She capped her pen and started stacking the binders back in the order she'd found them, which took a few minutes because she had pulled several layers deep. "I'll be here at 8:30, she said. "I'd like coffee before 9, if that's possible." It's possible. And the 2021 filings, if someone can locate them, they weren't in this stack. I'll have them. She picked up her purse. He stepped back to let her pass, which in the room's particular geometry meant they were briefly in the same narrow channel between the table and the wall, and she was close enough to be aware of how much space he occupied, not intrusively, just solidly, the way structures occupy space. "Lena," he said behind her. She stopped, turned. "The door," he said. "There's a code," he told it to her. 6 digits, which she repeated once in her head to seat it. "In case you arrive before anyone else." It was a small thing. It was also not a small thing. She understood that. "Thank you," she said. The 3 weeks went fast in the way that meaningful work goes fast. Not easy, but absorbing in the particular way of puzzles that have a shape to them, that have a logic underneath the surface mess. She found 4 more anomalies. She brought each one to Cade. He explained 3 of them. The 4th he didn't explain immediately, and she wrote it on the pad and let it sit, and 2 days later he handed her a folder and said that one, and she read what was in it and understood what she was looking at and sat with it quietly for a long time. It was the kind of information that clarified things. Not about ethics, exactly. She'd passed the point of ethical simplicity around day 4, when she'd found the first indication of what exactly Morrow and Associates was, in the structural sense, the non-conventional sense he'd mentioned in the bar. She'd known it then. She'd kept working anyway, which told her something about herself she was still examining. What the folder clarified was why it ran the way it ran. The structure, the subsidiaries, the careful categorization. It wasn't chaos. It was a system, built over years, with its own internal logic. The previous accountant hadn't documented it, because he'd understood it intuitively, which was sloppy in the way of all things that exist only in someone's head. But underneath the sloppiness was architecture. She told Cade this on a Wednesday evening when the building had gone quiet, and she was the last one on the floor besides him. "You built this over 12 years, she said, "which means the earlier filings are the foundation. Everything that looks like a problem now is actually a consequence of decisions made in 2014-2015. It's not that the structure is wrong. It's that the structure hasn't been updated for what it became." He was sitting across the table from her for the first time. He usually stood, usually moved, but she'd been talking for 40 minutes, and at some point he'd pulled out a chair and sat down without ceremony. "Can you update it?" he said. "It'll take longer than 6 weeks. How long? 3 to 4 months to do it right. Possibly longer, depending on what the real estate consolidation uncovers." She tapped her pen on the pad. "But at the end, you'll have something that's documented. Something that doesn't require a specific person to carry it in their head. Something that would survive." She paused. "Another transition." He was quiet. "The bonus we discussed," he said. "Double it." She looked at him. "I haven't finished the work yet." "No, but you described it back to me in a way no one has in 12 years. He looked at the stack of binders between them. "That's worth something," she said carefully. "You could have hired a major firm." "I did. They spent 4 months producing nothing I could use because they were trying to clean it up in a way that would distance you from it." "Yes." "Which would have broken it." "Yes." She understood then, in a way she hadn't entirely articulated yet, what this work actually was. It wasn't sanitizing. It wasn't concealing. It was comprehending, understanding the actual shape of the thing and building a structure around it that was honest about what it was, that could stand. It was, in an odd way, the most interesting problem she'd ever been given. 3 months, she said. "Maybe 4. And I need a dedicated workspace. The side room is fine, but I need my own key, not a code someone else also has. and I need direct contact with whoever handles the real estate entities, not through intermediaries. Done. He paused at the third. That second one is Harwick. He's careful with outsiders. I don't need him to trust me. I need him to answer questions. I'll make that happen. She nodded. She turned back to her legal pad. Lena. She looked up. He was looking at her the way he had in the bar that first night, steadily, with that quality of attention she'd noticed then and had noticed repeatedly since, the kind that meant something was being registered, being considered. The day you came in, he said, you could have asked what you were getting into. I did ask. Not really. She thought about it. He was right, technically. She'd asked about the tax situation. She hadn't asked what she was really asking. I knew, she said. I knew enough. She looked at the table. My whole life, people have given me the tidy version of things, the version without the uncomfortable parts. My mother, Devin, the job I was at. She ran her finger along the edge of the legal pad. I'd rather have the difficult truth than the comfortable incomplete version. I can work with the truth. I can't work with the gaps. A long silence. The sister, he said. Have you spoken to her? No. The word came out clean, no tremor in it. I have nothing to say to her. She made her choice. She can live in it. That doesn't bother you, the unresolved. It bothers me, she said. I just don't think talking to her would unresolved it. Some things stay unresolved. You find a way to build around the gap. He looked at her. You sound like someone who's had practice with that, he said. I grew up with a mother who loved my sister more. She said it without heat, factual, the way she might describe a financial irregularity. That's a gap. You can be angry about it forever, or you can factor it into your models and keep moving. She paused. I chose to keep moving. Something crossed his face. Not pity. She would have closed down immediately for pity. Something more like recognition. I don't, he stopped, started again. I'm not good at this part. The part where someone tells me something true about themselves. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to not ruin it. He was quiet for a moment. I haven't, he said. In case you were keeping count. She thought about it. He hadn't. He hadn't pushed past what she offered. He hadn't made assumptions. He hadn't treated her the way people often treated women who worked in proximity to powerful men, as extensions, as background, as hazards to be managed. He'd handed her the hard folder on a Tuesday and trusted her to read it and come back on Wednesday. No, she said, you haven't. The Harwick meeting was worse than she'd expected and better than she'd feared. He was a compact, careful man in his late 50s who looked at her for the first 30 seconds the way people look at things they expect to leave, as temporary nuisances. And then she started asking questions, and his look shifted to something she recognized as professional recalibration. By the end of the second hour, they were working. By the end of the third, he was pulling files without being asked. She left with 4 banker boxes and a contact number, and a sense that the real estate consolidation was going to be 3 weeks of hard work but was genuinely solvable, which she doubted going in, she told Cade that evening. He listened without interrupting, which remained the thing she'd noticed first and continued to notice. Most people listened waiting for the space to speak. He listened like he was building something from what you said. Harwick called me, he said, when she finished. Already, he said you were. Cade paused. Something dry in his expression. Looked at him. Is that a problem? No. The structural possibility of a smile again closer this time to actually arriving. Harwick has called me after every meeting, with every person who's worked with him for 15 years. He's never used that word before. She didn't know what to do with that either. She seemed to be collecting things she didn't know what to do with. It was 3 weeks after the Harwick meeting, when the thing happened that she hadn't anticipated. She was working late, later than usual, past 9, because the real estate consolidation had surfaced a 2019 filing that didn't match the records she had, and she was trying to reconcile it before she lost the thread. She was so focused that she didn't hear the voices in the hall until they were outside the door. 2 of them. One was a man she'd seen before, Renshaw. She'd noted the name without attaching much to it. Tall man, quiet, always in the building's east corridor. The other she didn't recognize. She couldn't hear the words exactly, but she caught the tone, low, not quite right. The kind of conversation that happens at the edge of a space because it's not supposed to happen in the center. Then she heard her name. She sat very still. Girl from accounting, and then something she couldn't catch, and then the Doyle event, and Cade's going to. And then a word she heard clearly, a word that meant she was a liability. A word that meant someone had decided she was in the way. Her hands were very steady. She noticed that. Same as in the break room on the night of the text. Something went very quiet inside her when it needed to. She took out her phone, pulled up Cade's number. Typed, "I need you here now." The side room. The response came in 45 seconds. On my way, he arrived in 4 minutes. By then, the voices in the hall were gone. She told him exactly what she'd heard, what she'd caught, what she'd inferred, how certain she was of each, with the same precision she brought to the ledgers. He listened, and his face went entirely still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. This had temperature to it. "Renshaw," he said. "I didn't recognize the other voice. I don't need you to." He looked at her directly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She paused. "I'm angry." "Good, is it?" "Yes." He sat down across from her, not across the table, in the room's other chair, closer. "I would be more concerned if you weren't. What happens to them?" He looked at her steadily. "Do you want to know that?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I want to know that it's handled. It will be handled." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him, not because she was naive, not because she trusted easily. She'd trusted Devin. She'd trusted her sister. She'd trusted employers who smiled while they restructured her out. But because she'd been reading this man's books for 3 months, and you can't read someone's true ledger without understanding the shape of what they're actually committed to. His commitments were narrow and specific, and he did not deviate from them. "I need to finish this reconciliation," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, "I'll stay." She didn't argue. She went back to the filing. He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls, quietly in the corner. She didn't listen. She did her work. At 11:15, she found the 2019 discrepancy. It was a rounding error, carried forward across 4 filings, small enough to escape notice but compounding in a way that had created a quiet fiction in the records. The kind of thing that would look bad in an audit. "I found it," she said. He came back to the table. She showed him. He looked at the numbers. How did that happen? Someone was reconciling manually instead of running the calculation. Probably in a hurry, and then no one checked the carry forward. She made a note. "I can fix it in the next quarterly filing. It'll take documentation. Can you document it in a way that's accurate?" she said. "Yes. I can document it accurately in a way that shows it as an accounting error, which it is, and close it properly." She looked at him. "That's always the answer. Accurate, clean, defensible." He looked at her. "That's how you think," he said. "It's the only way to think. Most people, in your position, would think about how to hide it. Hiding it makes it bigger," she said. "I'd rather have a small accurate problem than a large hidden one." A silence, and then he said, quietly, "I've been trying to tell my people that for 12 years. She looked up. "You should put it in the documentation," she said. "As a policy. In writing. So it's not just something you've said. It's something that's formal, that the structure reflects." He looked at her as if she'd said something unreasonable, and he was deciding whether to tell her. "Write it," he said finally. "Whatever you think it should say, I'll review it." She picked up her pen. She finished the consolidation in the 3rd month. She stayed for the 4th, as projected. She submitted the quarterly filings, clean and documented, defensible in every line. On the last day of the 4th month, Cade came to the side room, her room by then, with her own key, with her yellow legal pads stacked on the shelf and her coffee cup on the windowsill, and stood in the doorway. "The fiscal year closes cleanly," he said. "I know. I ran the final numbers this morning." She took off her reading glasses. "You're also going to owe approximately $42,000 in penalties on the 2021 real estate issue. I could have reduced that further, but only by claiming a classification I couldn't actually defend. The $42,000 is fine, I know." She looked at him. "I want you to know I knew that going in. I could have made it go away on paper. I chose not to. I know that too. A silence that was different from the early silences. The early ones had been about two people establishing what the other was. This one was past that. The position, he said, I'd like to make it permanent, not consulting. Staff, with a title and actual benefits and, he paused, which was unusual for him, a contract, written. Defensible. She looked at him for a moment. You're using my word, she said. It's a good word. She turned her pen over in her hand. She thought about the break room with the flickering light, the text message, the bar with the broken sign, the way she'd sat in that room on her first day and eaten a sandwich without looking up and felt, for the first time in years, like the work she was doing meant something. I have conditions, she said. You always do. Same 3 as before, restated formally, plus 1 more. She set down the pen. If something's wrong, if there's something in the books that crosses a line I can't cross, I tell you and we fix it. I'm not a shield. I'm not a cover. I'm the person who makes sure this runs clean, and if you need something that isn't clean, you tell me so I can walk away before it becomes my problem. He was quiet for a long time. That's a harder condition, he said. I know. Most people wouldn't ask for the right to leave. Most people don't understand their own value. She said it without bravado, factual, the way she might describe an asset in a balance sheet. I do now. He looked at her with that quality of attention she'd become accustomed to and would, she thought, be lost without. Agreed, he said. All 4. She picked up her pen. Then let's do the contract, she said. I want the language precise. He sat down across from her and pulled the table toward him, and for the first time in 4 months he was the one who reached for the legal pad. Where do we start? He said. She looked at the blank page between them, clean, honest, ready. At the beginning, she said, where all the real numbers live.